For the Department of Audit, I'm Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Hogan, Councilor Caldwell, and President Hudson. Auditor Maroon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilor Green. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
Come on, better than that.
Good morning, Mr. Auditor. Leave me alone, it's too early.
Well, first of all, let me introduce who's with me today. On my right is Lori and Mike, who are part of our staff, and I'm very grateful to have their assistance. Also, I want to thank Director Rudd and his staff. Mary has probably suffered. She's here. There's Mary. She suffered through many of these budget hearings. And Julie and Stacy, who works with us on our budget and to whom I contact all the time. So thank you kindly, all three of you, and also you, Director Rudd. So our budget is pretty self-explanatory. It's not a big one, as you can see, and really there's not a whole lot to talk about from that perspective. I provided each of you a notebook with some of the audits that we've done over the past couple of years to give you context in terms of the types of findings and recommendations that we have found, and what we're doing on behalf of you and your constituents, the taxpayer. So
I just have one question for you, Ms.
Sure. While you're finding that, though, can I just also say that if you want to ask me any questions about the Syracuse redistricting, as you know, I've been staffing that for a year and a half now, and we have finally got some assistance with your all's help to get a part-time person, Jahan. So if you have any questions about the status of that, I'm happy to provide that as well. Sorry, President Hudson.
Just one question. I'm looking at your professional services, and I'm looking at the projected. Why is that? Or is that just projected?
It's the, it should be, that was for last year. We had to pay the New York law. Jeff Weiss was $50,000, right, Stacy?
Okay.
And the other was another, what was the other? $25,000 for the redistricting commission had requested those funding.
Okay, so
it was put in our budget for that.
Okay.
For that purpose.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So.
Okay then. Nice meeting. We're all set?
So, Mr. Auditor, so I know you were here for the police department budget hearing as well, and one of the things that came up there was we were talking about the staffing in the police department and their numbers of what's the right amount of people they have, what's the right amount of buckets in each department, so whether it be patrol versus the other departments, and then also kind of their deployment of, you know, are they putting people during the right times, are they managing time off, and all those things. And one of the things we had talked about and suggested to Chief Cecil was, you know, doing a study or doing kind of an audit of how they go about that. And then in talking to some of the other counselors, it may be something that may work best coming from your office, just to kind of get that independence of it. And I'm just kind of curious your perspective, if your capacity to do something like that, if we were to be able to find the funds to get an outside consultant that kind of reported through you and then had oversight over that specific piece within SBD.
I think it's a great idea on many levels. And so the short answer is yes, we would be willing to do that. It would require some extra funding, and you all can make that determination, obviously.
Would that, not to cut you off, but what would that funding be for a person or for a consultant?
A consultant, probably. I wouldn't see that we would have a person that we would have long-term. It would be short-term, kind of like what IT does, in having some consultant services. So I think probably Chief Cecil would welcome that, and probably also the IT, the digital services people, Kelsey, would welcome that as well. So I think it makes a lot of sense as we are transitioning with a new police chief now, and also transitioning in terms of the software that the city's going to be using to keep track of this. I know Councilor Hogan asked the question of Chief Cecil at that meeting about, are they still using the pieces of paper for overtime? And the answer was kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, we're still sort of using them.
Yeah, exactly. Even though they have this new software called Telestaff. But so, yes, we're happy to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, I think the reason why it would make sense to go into the auditor's office for the independence is, I've been part of studies at the city, but other places where you'll typically get kind of a preliminary draft when you hire a consultant, and sometimes the department can edit some of the findings in a way that makes no one look bad, right? And no one's here trying to make SPD look bad, but we want the independence of, okay, this is the recommendations without, any kind of changes there. So that was my thought as to why I think having the independence of the auditor's office kind of be the one that contracts with a consultant would give us the most clear results of it, so.
Oh, I totally agree, and you all know me, I'm very independent, and also the office itself is, so it makes perfect sense, and I know enough about it, to participate. And I can also communicate and keep you all abreast, so happy to do it. You outline it, how you'd like to do it, and we can discuss in terms of what we're looking at budgetarily. But yes. Long and the short answer is yes. How can I help?
And I think Nader, you've been around for actually longer than me. And I think President Hudson knows this too. I think it's important to look at the police department in conjunction with what we expect out of them as far as the whole city's perspective goes.
Yes.
I know, for instance, just little things like a police presence, as far as when we go to neighborhood meetings, people want to see a police presence, but the police department's always said we're more effective actually responding to emergencies than we are just our presence, and that's always been sort of a clash. Just things like that. I think that would behoove us, and I know that there's been police over the years. There's been studies done. To Councilor Green's point, there's been studies done, commissioned about the police department, but they're always been sort of aligned with police, the agencies basically.
Well,
So-
President Hudson raised that question when we were on the council together. How many times, the group out of Albany? I mean, you've raised that that point with Chief Fowler, Chief Buckner, right?
And the money's still
So
flowing.
you're right, Counselor.
He sent his kids through school just like the studies we mentioned. So I think this is a great opportunity for us, especially with the transition that you mentioned.
Well, and the other factor too is, as Director Rudd said yesterday when I asked the question about where we're going budgetarily with the ARPA funds, we're going away. As a former counselor and as the city auditor, I don't think I'd spend a day that I don't think about the structural deficit of the city's budget. It's just ingrained in me, in my DNA. And so the two most expensive departments in the city are DPW and the police department. And they're very important to the public safety and to the services. So looking at it, I think makes a lot of sense to do that. And I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, and I think there's a budgetary component, but there's also a service level component where a lot of the calls we get are response times aren't where people want them to be, but we're not experts on public safety, right? So for us to be able to say, all right, let's give it to an outside group that can tell us, if you want to get good response times, here's the steps to do that. I think it's a helpful thing.
There's even an economic development. I mean, a safe city is a city people feel safe spending money in too. Basically, that's what it is. There's all sorts of different aspects that I don't think have ever been studied to any kind of extent.
Your timing is perfect. On my way in earlier this morning, I was listening to something on NPR talking exactly about what you just said, about the economic development of a safe city. And, you said often, Counselor, that, and those of you who are dealing with the constituents and the taxpayer, they want to have a police presence, and so, but let's do it in a responsible financial way that makes it so. Again, happy to do it, Counselor.
Excellent.
In that same vein, would every department at some point get that kind of, review that we're proposing?
I think we can, right? I mean, I think police is a place to start because it's just the most expensive. But it's something I think as we go forward, if there's other departments where we think
But maybe go through every single, regardless if we think there's red flags or no red flags, start with the most expensive and go down to the least, and then loop the cycle again, however long it takes, 5 years.
I believe that's kind of what DPW is doing at the moment on their own accord. But yeah, agreed.
Well, and I also think there's kind of like Councilor Schultz's point too. The departments tend to be short-staffed to an extent, and which means you're always kind of putting out fires, which means you're never sitting back and being, what's the strategic things we can do to be more efficient? You're just kind of responding to different. So that's where I think kind of taking a step back and being strategic about it can make some sense.
Again, I was just having a conversation this morning with one of the people in the digital services department. And again, the transformation, and you heard at the presentation from Chief Administrative Officer Kaliba, that we're trying to go, everything's going to the cloud pretty much. And so digital services can help with some of these departments that are short-staffed if they're doing things from a technological standpoint. So it makes sense, Councilor Schultz and others, to look at all of these departments in that vein. We've never done anything like that, as far as I know. So it's good to hear DPW is doing that. I wasn't aware of that, Councilor.
And that's fine, but I personally think that departments, it should be independent, because if I had a department, I'm gonna give you the best outcome out of my department.
Right.
I've never met a department that says we don't need more people and resources. It's just
Right.
normal management, right? So, yeah.
Everything's working fine.
Well, the demands on from the constituents, you know, with social media and everything else that has happened in transition from the days of how we used to provide services to now. I mean, take recycling, for instance, doesn't get picked up. It's all over everybody's aware of
They're
it
on
in
time
every
this
neighborhood.
week. They're on time this week. Let's give them credit. Good job, DPW.
No, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but the point is that people are more aware of these kind of things, and so taking a look at it like that in an independent way and no vested interest it makes a lot of sense. I would agree with you all on that.
Auditor in the room, let me ask you a question. I went through your oversight materials. How was this when you I know you presented it to the mayor's office, correct?
No,
Oh, just us?
just the council.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want to take a step back and
I mean-
kind of give us a high-level overview of it?
Let me say that all the audits that have been done have been shared with the administration and looking for their response, and is also posted on the city's website under the office of the city auditor. So in terms of, there's no mystery here. This information is
You just didn't give them
publicly
the summary in this
And what
form.
I gave you all was just the findings and recommendations, because I feel very strongly that, let me see, I got a note I had want to share with you. Bear with me a second here. Pass that along. So, with respect to these audits, I wrote this up just as my own mental notes, and I'll read it, but then you'll have a copy of it. As a result of all the audit findings and recommendations included in the oversight and follow-up material notebook we provided each of you with, some obvious findings are apparent. The city auditor has had difficulty in receiving a timely response for information from management, which has delayed completion of the audit sometimes considerably. And in our latest parking garage audit, the sheer denial of access has resulted in an incomplete report. Some audits, parking meters, parking garages, have received no response from management to date. In almost every instance where responses have been provided by management to the audits, management has indicated actions to be taken to remedy situations, sometimes including dates or timelines by which actions will be completed. With rare exception, very few of these actions have been completed to date and deadlines have not been met. The police department, however, did provide policy with regard to COVID within the 6-month period after the audit that you all had requested that we to do. Most importantly, an almost universal finding that these audits have uncovered is that there is a serious lack of internal controls and accountability in the administration. Many procedures, manuals, guidelines indicating individuals responsible for oversight, checks and balances with regard to fiscal issues are either lacking completely or are ignored. This finding has led to the conclusion that some contractual obligations have not been met, that the city has overspent unnecessarily in several cases, and that issues of public safety have been ignored. While the Office of the City Auditor has no power to compel action on these issues, the Common Council has oversight with regard to the city budget. As a result, the council can, in my humble opinion, and should take action on these findings and recommendations. Particularly with regard to finances, the council can delay action on items, ask specific questions about accountability, and follow through, and yes, you have the power to subpoena records as necessary. The Common Council has the ability and the fiduciary duty, and hopefully the will, to take some action on these matters. So, that's 2.5 years of my work with my staff in coming to those conclusions. We present you the audits, we give you the findings and recommendations to you and to the administration. There's a management response in most cases to the findings that we have and the recommendations that have been put forward. In most cases, they have agreed with our findings and recommendations. The problem is the follow-up and the implementation. And that's why we're appealing to all of you, and that's why you have the notebook. I wanted to put it in a concise form for you of the findings and the recommendations so that you all can decide where you think it's in the best interest of the taxpayer to follow up on these issues. So I'm happy to provide to sit with you individually or in a collective group of three counselors to discuss these issues with you, have you read the audit that's online or the ones that we've shared with you. But I'm appealing to you as a body. You have the power. We don't in our office have that power. You do. And I think in the spirit of what we're talking about this morning and what Councilor Driscoll's saying they're doing in the DPW, I'm very happy to hear that. I think looking at all these departments in the detail of what you're saying, and the council can put budget dollars in to make that happen, makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, the one that you, Councilor Hudson, that you wanted us, or you're going to have a meeting about tomorrow or Thursday, I listened at the Labor Coalition meeting to the frustration by people about what's going on with their health care. And people making decisions arbitrarily for their benefit financially, not necessarily for the payees, the individuals. Mm-hmm. So taking a look at these things and findings, what we do, we try to be as objective as possible so that we can give you the intelligence to figure out what it is, the information and intelligence and background to make decisions about how you want to go about it. That's what the notebook is about.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I do have a question about the parking garages and the monies owed and the taxes not filed. Is that still up to date, or has there been any?
So in the sales tax and the Harrison Garage audit we did, the sales tax, the city historically has paid the sales tax to the state. When we charge a patron in a garage and we collect the monies, those monies then have to be sent to the state. The state then in turn sends back to counties. We have an intermunicipal agreement with the county of Onondaga on how those funds are going to be distributed to the city and the other municipalities in the county. Mm-hmm. What we found was that the finance department had made the decision to stop paying the state those taxes, sales tax. So there's two things that we found that were problematic with that. One is there was no evidence that the city had any right to do that, number one. And if they did do it, why were they still collecting the revenues from the parking patrons? And if the city didn't have to pay the sales tax, do they have a plan to pay the patrons back for the money that they collected? So I spoke with the Commissioner of Finance after that report and suggested, and I called myself to the New York State Taxation and Finance Department and found out that there's legal counsel that this commissioner, our commissioner, should talk with. He's in correspondence with them, as far as I know, and I wrote to him on Monday to ask if there was any further update about that. He has not responded to me, so I don't know that part. Harrison Garage, when we started looking at parking garages, Harrison is leased to the Hotel Syracuse. And what we discovered is that they have not been making their payments to the city, to the tune now of $760,000. We asked during our audit of the sales tax in Harrison Garage, we asked the administration for whatever correspondence and what was going on, and had they made the council aware that the city has not received these revenues. We also mentioned to Director Rudd that the Harrison Garage was in arrears, so as they prepared their budget, they could see in terms of lost revenue that the city. To date, you heard both Director Rudd and myself yesterday say, I don't know where we're at with that. That's the administration, I would imagine, is having some conversations. I don't know. We never got an answer to that.
Yeah, we kind of did. I think, who was it? Somebody said that they were gonna work another, something to roll over.
Well, there's,
I can't remember exactly how they said it, but they gave an explanation.
that was me. So, I know I'm not memorable.
Mask on.
I'm not very memorable.
I can't tell who it is.
I'm not very memorable. I understand that.
You always make an indelible impression of me.
Glad to see I love to fly under the radar, as you all know. So there was a 20-year deal. It was a contract with the hotel. It said the first 5 years that they were going to pay $33,333. Is that coming back now?
Yeah.
And then as July 1 of 2021, they were supposed to start paying $37,500. And there was also, if they weren't making the payments, that there were late fees that were associated with it. Thus, that's why you see the total that you do. To the best of my knowledge, so the first 5 years, so they had to then come back for the second 5 years, and then third and fourth 5 years. So if there's some contract negotiations going on, we've not been shared that information with. I have no idea. And I understand the difficulty the hotel may have had given the pandemic. I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm only trying to follow the facts. And the facts said here's an ordinance. And let me say, in true confession, what I have learned in the past 2.5 years, one of the things that I learned is I didn't do a good job as a city councilor. I did not do a good job in following up on audits and on ordinances were passed. And making sure that we, as a body, as common councilors, were making sure that the legislation that we passed was, in fact, being affected. I did not do my role of something that I'm terribly disappointed in myself about. So I'm trying to do the best I can with our staff to present to you the information for you all to do what you should and can do. You have the power. You can subpoena any of these records from any department.
Well, I mean, in this particular case, I mean, obviously, any kind of deal they make, they have to amend before the council.
That's correct.
So now we're aware of it, so we'll be looking for it, and they made, that presentation to you that they're going to do that, correct? Or they're working out a deal.
No, I've not heard anything. No response to the information we requested.
Well, they
I don't know if
said-
they have done something with the council, but to my knowledge, no, Councilor Hogan. I know nothing about whether there's any
Do
conversation.
you copy us on that, some of those interactions? You probably should at least copy the president of the council and the rest of the leadership. And some of those interactions you have about that stuff?
When we're doing the audit, no, I have not done that.
I mean, at the end, so like I just brought to your attention, the ordinance that should be amended. We're going to come to it.
So when we do the audit, all those correspondences are documented and are part of the appendix to the audit. That's all there.
Okay.
That's all there for you. As Councilor Penagua and I worked on the workers' comp, when Councilor Paniagua came to me and said, can you help me with this? We're having a meeting on going forward on workers' comp. I was happy we sat and we walked through it. And so, and the audit has all of those email correspondences, et cetera. in the appendix of every document that we do, every report that we do, rather. So,
Quick question, was this CNS study that was done in the parking garages, May 2020, did the council approve monies to have that done years ago?
yes.
And so now this great report that's clearly saying all our garages are gonna fall into the ground tomorrow, get your car out of there. I noticed that we did just pass some monies to repair one of the garages, I think like $80,000, but is there like a major follow-through with this report, or is it
So-
just a suggestion?
Thank you for raising that question, because the other day at the parking garages budget hearing, Mr. Monin said, when asked by Councilor Driscoll if there was any structural problems in the garages, and his initial response was no, and said then there was some minor ones at the Center Street Armory. I don't know how to say this other than to be honest about it. If you look at the capital plan, it has in there $10 million for parking garage rehab. I don't know what that is for other than that. If you look at the 2020 CNS engineering report, it says $6.2 million for AXA garage, and then identifies additional monies needed for the other garages, all structural related, all structural issues. These parking garages are not in the best shape. These parking garages are not in compliance with the Syracuse City Property Conservation Code. These parking garages don't have elevators with inspections certificate. They're supposed to be done biannually. So the monies that have been identified both by CNS engineers and the capital plan dollars requested each year tells anybody to the naked eye there are structural safety security issues in these parking garages. Again, when I was on the council, we were talking about selling these garages. Councilor Hudson and Councilor Hogan are probably aware of that. We can't sell these garages in the condition that they're in, and in my opinion, and CNS engineers, I think, has documented that. That's required by law that every 2 years, an independent agency again has to do an assessment. And if you look at the 2018 and the 2020 reports from CNS engineers, it clearly identifies the issues with the parking garages and from a structural standpoint, and things that should be done immediately.
Is there a state inspection, or heaven forbid, a federal inspection that comes in and checks the safety and determines if they should be condemned, or?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Nita, going back to your discussion about selling the garages, I know when that came up previously, one of the issues we would asked was, which ones make money, what's the revenue, what's the expenses for both, and it did seem like it was hard to get a clear answer on that some of the revenues are mingled, some of the expenses are mingled. From your review of this and the kind of the financial component of it, is there still more work to be done there to clearly delineate which assets are generating which revenues and which expenses, so that if a future council does decide to sell, they can say, okay, Harrison Street is making this much money and Axe is making this much money?
The short answer is yes, there's much more work that needs to be done. Currently, there is not, we asked for the expenses and revenue from each garage for a period of 6 years. We were not given that information. We were only given information from May of 2021 through August of 2021. Number one. Number two, in terms of the budget for parking garages falls under DPW, under transportation. We made the recommendation in our report that the parking garages should be a separate entity in the Department of Public Works budget, not in transportation. For instance, any work that's done by our city employees is not identified in terms of a cost. It's all, there's no work orders, so you don't know who has done what in what garage. And it was been publicly stated by the chief operating officer that at the time this administration had been looking to sell the garages, they did not have the necessary information when they put that information out there about wanting to sell the garages. They couldn't provide that information based on the questions that potential buyers were looking at. So a lot of work needs to be done, in our opinion, to find the true aggregate expenses and revenue for the garages. But the first priority, in my humble opinion, is we need to address the security and safety issues. You and I have spoken before about parking in the AXA garage. I challenge any of you on any given day, go over and walk through, and you tell us what you see. Go into AXA garage. Just take a walk through. That's all. It's nothing about what I think or what we've done. You just go and you come back and you tell us. What did you find?
Does LAS provide security though? I thought they did. Don't
Yeah.
they have a 24-hour or?
LAS, under the contract, are responsible for the security.
Okay.
Well, there's supposed to be security cameras in all of the garages. Currently, there's no security cameras in the AXA garage. In the Washington Street garage, the systems are set up so that they can have the cameras viewed from that location. When Lori and I went on an unannounced visit to look to see how does that work, that system work, the gentleman that was there didn't even know how to run a computer. But he was in charge of viewing of all of the other garages from a security standpoint. There was no operating emergency phones in the elevators. And you know, not to be gender specific, but if somebody's there, if a female's in there and she's pregnant, she's having problems, and who do you call? How do you call somebody? This is a potential problem, you know, and the security, given the world we live in, this should not be the case. So LAS is responsible per the contract to provide the security. And that's why, as I said, in my note that I handed out to all of you, there's some contractual responsibilities that are not being addressed.
But the city has to install those phones and all the other devices. LAS would just monitor them.
The city hires Kone or somebody else, like the ones that are working on the back elevator here. They hire people like that to do. They don't. The city workers don't do it. The tradespeople don't do that work. That's hired out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But we haven't done that.
Other questions?
You've really informed us, Nader. We appreciate all your hard work. I reject the idea that you are a fine city councilor. And, well, I mean, and you are aware of the city council and our duties and, the resources that we have to rely upon.
Yeah.
You know, and you're one of our resources. And when we talk about parking garages, that's not only an issue for safety, but and everything else. It's also an issue for policy. And we all know why the city controls the parking garages, obviously.
Right.
But maybe with what we've learned over the last couple of years of COVID, with people working from home, maybe other things will have to be considered as far as that goes.
Well, Mr. Monin, to his credit, I personally hadn't really given any thought of that because I guess I'm too myopic in terms of what I'm supposed to be doing on your behalf. When he mentioned about I-81, and he's right that we're going to need the parking, locations. All the more reason why we as a city need to make sure that our garages are up to snuff, so that we are not exposed to any potential liability. I mean, he made the case. So, thank you. In terms of, as being a counselor, I feel badly about it because there's just opportunity here that
That's because you're a Roman Catholic.
That's it.
The guilt.
I got that guilt.
Guilt is
Yeah,
built
the
in.
guilt is it, right, Joe?
comes, yeah, it comes with the Christmas.
Well, as a new counselor, I like to hear you say that. I'm sorry that you feel that way now and that you're disappointed in yourself, but I really feel in the dark most days about being a counselor, being 113 days or whatever days it is. So I appreciate that, and I'm going to be knocking on your door, and I'm going to say, Mr. Yoda, can you please teach me Obi-Wan?
Happy to do it.
So
Take the
thanks.
pressure off of me.
Yeah, exactly. He's getting boring.
You can talk to any of the constituents in the 5th district, and they will tell you did a fabulous job. They still ask for Nader.
Especially the old ladies.
Listen,
They st- they
the only
still-
city
still
council
come
I
back
know
up
who
to it.
shovels the sidewalks in his neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean,
Nice.
that's a vote getter right
And
there.
one of the only city councils I know that visit all the older people in the hospital. He does that.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Auditor. Appreciate it. We'll close the hearing.
We'll just hear from you